The air in the terminal buzzed with the usual symphony of boarding announcements, rolling suitcases, and quiet anticipation. But at gate C-23, something felt off. The moment Zora and Zadie Washington stepped forward, the energy changed, subtle but sharp, like a door quietly locking behind them. They stood side by side, 17 and identical, their matching burgundy carry-ons resting at their feet, boarding passes ready. Around them, other passengers moved smoothly past the smiling gate agent, whose demeanor shifted noticeably when the girls approached. The practiced politeness in her expression hardened into a neutral mask, cold and impersonal. "I'm sorry," the agent said, her tone dipped in formality, just loud enough to attract the attention of nearby travelers. "There seems to be an issue with your tickets." Zora felt the muscles in her stomach tighten, but her voice remained steady. "That's impossible. We checked in online this morning. Our seats are confirmed." The woman didn't look up. Her fingers tapped rapidly against the keyboard. "The system is flagging your reservation," she said. "I'll need to see additional identification." Zadie and Zora exchanged a look, one that held more than just confusion. They'd been here before. Not this gate, not this city, but this moment, that subtle flicker where being black and young became a reason for suspicion. They handed over their state IDs, freshly laminated and barely 3 months old. They weren't even 18 yet, but this wasn't their first flight alone. A white woman in a navy pantsuit stepped up behind them, boarding pass in hand. She smiled tightly and glanced at her watch. "Is there a problem?" she asked the agent. Her voice clipped, impatient. The gate agent's tone softened instantly. "No problem at all, Miss Keller. You may proceed." The woman passed without issue, her heels clicking confidently down the jetway, barely sparing the girls a glance. Zadie felt her pulse quicken. Her fingers closed around her phone. "I'm calling Dad," she whispered. The agent's reaction was subtle but unmistakable. A stiffening of the shoulders, a flicker in the eyes. A nerve struck. "That won't be necessary," the woman said quickly. "I just need to complete the verification process." But Zadie was already dialing. 3 rings. Then his voice, deep, familiar, reassuring, filled her ear. "Dad, we have a situation," she said, calm but firm. "They're refusing to let us board. Yes, we have our IDs. Yes, the tickets are confirmed. No, they're not giving us a reason." Passengers nearby began to slow, drawn by the calm power in her voice. The gate agent's eyes darted toward a small glass-paneled office labeled supervisor. A security officer appeared near the counter, speaking quietly with the agent, then glancing at the girls. "I'm going to let you speak to the supervisor," Zadie said, and held out the phone to the security officer. Her arm didn't waver. The officer hesitated, then took the phone and stepped aside. Zora stood silently beside her sister, her jaw tight. They had done everything right, followed every rule. Still this. Patricia, the gate agent, suddenly found her composure. She tapped again at her keyboard. "Oh, I see the issue now," she said, voice bright but strained. "Looks like it was just a minor system error." She returned their boarding passes with a stiff smile. "You're all set." Zora didn't move. What exactly was the issue? "Just a glitch," Patricia answered, eyes skating away. "It happens. To everyone?" Zora asked quietly. "Or just to certain passengers?" Before Patricia could respond, the security officer returned with Zadie's phone, his posture now deferential. "You're cleared to board," he said. "Apologies for the inconvenience." The twins stepped onto the jetway, their heads held high. Behind them, murmurs rippled through the crowd. And ahead of them, the thin metal bridge to the aircraft felt heavier than it should. As they settled into their premium seats, the soft leather a poor comfort, Zadie's phone buzzed. "On my way to the airport now. We need to talk about what just happened. Love you both." Dad. Zora looked out the window. Zadie sat in silence. Neither of them had cried, but both knew something deep had cracked open. And nothing, not the plush cabin, not the apologetic smiles, would seal it shut again. 72 hours earlier, in a tower of glass and steel overlooking downtown Chicago, Marcus Washington sat at his mahogany desk on the 48th floor of Terra Global Technologies. From this height, the city looked like something he could rearrange at will, a map of influence, wealth, and calculated power. But today his mind wasn't on his empire. It was on his daughters. He reread the calendar notification for the 5th time, Zora and Zadie. Flight arrives Friday, 15 p.m. A faint smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. They'd be flying in for the weekend, their first solo trip since he and Caroline had separated. It hadn't been easy on them. On Zadeh especially. He reached for a framed photo on the corner of his desk, one of the girls from their 16th birthday, laughing in matching sundresses, arms flung around each other's shoulders. It reminded him of everything he wanted to preserve and everything he feared he'd already lost. Gloria, his executive assistant, stepped into the room, tablet in hand, expression tight behind her signature silver bun. The board is assembled in the conference room, and Richard Dalton's office called again. That's the third time this week. Marcus sighed, still pushing the partnership. Gloria nodded, hard. He wants Terra Global's security system in Meridian's airports yesterday. Schedule a 10-minute call for tomorrow. No more. And the girls, she added more gently. They land at 2:15. The car service is arranged. Already confirmed, she replied. And the surprise you planned, everything's ready. Marcus nodded, eyes softening. Good. I want it to be perfect. As he stood buttoning his suit jacket with practiced ease, his phone buzzed a text from Caroline. Girls packed. Nervous but excited. Please remind them to call me when they land. Will do, he replied. Then came her follow-up. Zadeh's been quieter than usual. This is her first time flying without me since everything. He paused, thumb hovering above the screen. Zadeh had always been the more emotionally attuned of the two, sensitive, deeply perceptive. Zora had his sharp logic and ambition, but Zadeh had something rarer, a quiet empathy that unsettled people who underestimated her. They're waiting, Marcus, Gloria reminded him softly. He placed the phone in his pocket and stepped out into the hallway, nodding once. Time to be the CEO again. Inside the boardroom, 8 members sat around a polished table. Martin Chen, chairman of the board, rose as Marcus entered. Marcus, glad you could join us, Martin said, his voice sharp but not unkind. We were just discussing the Meridian proposal. I wasn't aware that was on today's agenda, Marcus replied coolly, taking his seat. It wasn't, Diane Foster interjected. As the only other person of color on the board, and his fiercest ally, she always picked her battles wisely. But it seems some feel it deserves urgent discussion. Martin slid a tablet across the table. Meridian is going public with their interest in our tech. They've drafted a press release suggesting the deal is already underway. Marcus skimmed the screen. They're getting ahead of themselves. We haven't agreed to anything. But we should, said William Barrett, voice firm, and eyes gleaming with the entitlement of old money. They're offering $20 million for exclusivity, plus a share of the cost savings. It's a solid deal. It's a lowball, Marcus countered, and exclusivity limits our market. The system is worth twice that minimum. It's not even fully tested, Diane reminded the room. We're still resolving the bias concerns. Marcus nodded. Exactly. I won't move forward until the system performs equally for everyone. Come on, Marcus, William sighed. Every system has a margin of error, not when that error disproportionately affects certain communities. Marcus shot back, his voice like tempered steel. My daughters would be 19 times more likely to be flagged than your granddaughters, William. That's not a margin. That's a failure. Silence settled like dust. No one looked away, but no one pushed back either. Because this was the part they couldn't argue with. Marcus hadn't just built Terra Global. He was Terra Global. From Southside Chicago to MIT. From poverty to a Forbes list. They all knew his story, and they knew he wasn't bluffing. I'm not saying we ignore the issue, Martin said carefully, but Meridian's pressure could accelerate the rollout. Marcus stood slow and deliberate. We don't launch under pressure. We launch when it's right, and not a day before. As the meeting broke up, Gloria was waiting with a fresh cup of coffee and a raised eyebrow. They pushed Meridian again, she asked knowingly. Marcus took the cup, nodding. They think I'm being sentimental, that I'm letting my daughters cloud my judgment. But you're not, she said. No, Marcus said softly. I'm remembering what it felt like to be treated as suspicious just for walking into the wrong room, and I refuse to build a system that does the same. From behind him, the skyline glittered. His daughters were coming. And soon so would the reckoning. Back in Boston, the Washington home buzzed with quiet preparation. Zora stood in front of her open closet, carefully curating each outfit for the trip. She held up a charcoal blazer, tilting her head in thought. "It's just Dad," came Zadeh's voice from the bed, where she sat cross-legged, with a pencil dancing across the pages of her sketchbook. "You're overthinking this." "It's not just Dad," Zora replied without turning. "It's his world, Terra Global, meetings, his team. We need to look like we belong." Zadeh rolled her eyes, but the smile on her lips betrayed a hint of affection. "We're his daughters. We already belong." Their mother, Caroline Washington, leaned against the doorway, arms folded, watching them with quiet pride. At 49, she still carried the sharp elegance of her early days as a high-powered environmental attorney, the same presence that had once caught Marcus's eye across a tech conference ballroom. The marriage hadn't survived the years, but her belief in her daughters never wavered. "You belong anywhere you choose to be," she said firmly, stepping into the room, "with or without your father's name." Zora nodded, catching her mother's eye in the mirror. The comment wasn't hostile, but it wasn't neutral either. Subtle barbs had become more frequent since the separation. Zadeh noticed too, but said nothing. "I just want to make a good impression," Zora offered. "First time we're seeing his world up close. You'll impress them with your mind, not your clothes," Caroline said, then paused. "Though that blazer is a good choice." Across the room, Zadeh slipped the sketchbook shut and stretched before moving to her own closet. She pulled out a flowing blue dress patterned with intricate swirls, one of her own designs. "Do you think he's different now?" she asked, not looking up. Since he moved back to Chicago, Zora's hand froze on a hanger. "I don't know," she admitted. "He sounds the same on video calls." "But it's not the same," Zadeh murmured. "There's this distance, not just miles, like something shifted." Zora exhaled. "He's under pressure. That new security system, it means a lot to him." "He explained it to us like it would change the world," Zadeh said, smoothing the fabric of the dress between her fingers. "AI screening, no shoe removal, no pat-downs, everything efficient, respectful. Revolutionary," he said. Zora placed the blazer into her suitcase. "Let's just hope he remembers we're coming to see him, not his company." That earned a soft laugh from Zadeh. Gloria said he planned a surprise. She wouldn't say what Zora replied, but apparently he's been working on it for weeks. The rest of the evening passed in companionable quiet, packing, laughing over old photos, rechecking flight times. But the closer it got to departure, the more Caroline hovered. The next morning, she wrapped them both in tight hugs at the door arms, strong with motherly resolve. "Call me when you land. And if anything doesn't feel right, you come straight home." "Mum?" "We'll be fine," Zora smiled. "We've got the hotel confirmation car service arranged." Zadeh added, ever the peacemaker. "And Dad said he'll meet us at the airport." Caroline tucked a curl behind Zadeh's ear. "I know. I miss you already." As the car pulled away from the curb, Caroline stood on the porch, waving her silhouette growing smaller with each block. Zadeh looked back longer than Zora did. The ride to Logan Airport was filled with the usual excitement. Zadeh sketched Chicago's skyline from memory, imagining the Art Institute and lakefront parks. Zora ran through their itinerary on her phone, organizing everything down to meal options. At the terminal, the girls moved with ease, products of frequent travel with parents who'd taught them how to navigate airports young. IDs, boarding passes, security, all smooth. They found their gate C23 and settled into seats near the window. "I'm going to grab a coffee," Zora said, standing. "Want anything chai latte, please?" Zadeh was already flipping open her sketchbook. As Zora disappeared into the line, Zadeh felt her nerves for the first time. Not because of the flight, but the reunion. The last time they'd seen Marcus in person, he and Caroline were still pretending to be a team. Now, there were no illusions, and she wasn't sure what version of her father she was flying toward. Pre-boarding for Flight 1482 to Chicago, O'Hare will begin shortly, came the announcement. Zadeh texted her sister, "They're starting to board. Where are you?" A moment later, lines long. "On my way. Save our place." Zadeh gathered her things and moved closer to the boarding area. The gate was buzzing with the usual energy, parents corralling toddlers, travelers adjusting backpacks. A young man in a pilot's uniform caught her eye and offered a polite nod. You flying to Chicago? He asked. Yeah, she said hesitantly. Visiting our dad. He smiled. Great city, born there myself. I'm Jake, first officer in training. Not flying your plane though, just observing today. I'm Zadeh. She shook his hand. Before she could say more, Zora arrived balancing 2 drinks. Sorry that took forever, she said, handing one over. Barista was new. Jake gave them a friendly wave and headed off. Zora smirked, making friends already, just being polite. Zadeh said, cheeks warm. He's nice. When their group was called, they stepped into line, boarding passes and IDs ready. They weren't thinking of justice or technology or race, not yet. But the moment Patricia scanned the passes, everything changed. Patricia, the gate agent, scanned Zora's boarding pass first. A sharp beep sliced the air. She didn't smile, didn't nod. Instead, her eyes narrowed with the sort of clinical skepticism that had nothing to do with policy and everything to do with perception. May I see your ID, please? She asked, her tone clipped and formal. Zora handed it over without hesitation. Patricia studied it far longer than necessary, her lips pursed as if deciphering a code. Eventually she nodded almost reluctantly and let Zora through. Then came Zadeh. The same beep. The same cold stare. ID. Zadeh complied. Patricia took her time again, then handed it back with a strained smile that didn't reach her eyes. You two are traveling together, she asked, though it was obvious. We're sisters, Zora said. Twins. Patricia said nothing but pressed something on her terminal. Seconds later, a uniformed security officer appeared, his expression unreadable. He leaned down and Patricia whispered something too quiet to hear. Then both turned their attention back to the girls. Is there a problem? Zora asked, her spine straightening. We need to verify your documentation, the officer said. Please step aside. But we've already shown you our IDs, Zadeh replied, her voice sharper than before. And our tickets were confirmed online. The system flagged your reservation, Patricia said flatly. This is standard procedure. Zora's eyebrows rose. Standard for who? Around them other passengers, mostly white, were gliding through with no issue. Even those whose passes beeped received little more than a glance. If you'll just come with me, the officer said, gesturing toward a nearby bench. Zadeh froze. That feeling, the knot in her stomach, the invisible sign above her head that read, not quite one of us. She'd felt it in luxury stores, in school hallways, in elevators where no one expected them to get off on the executive floor. She pulled out her phone. I'm calling our dad. That got Patricia's attention. Her face flickered, not with panic but recognition. This wasn't just a teenager making a fuss. Zadeh's fingers flew across the screen. 3 rings. Then Zadeh. What's wrong, Dad? She said, her voice calm but controlled. They're refusing to let us board. Yes, we have our IDs. Yes, the tickets are confirmed. No, they won't give us a reason. Marcus's voice, though inaudible to the gate crew, shifted something in the air. Authority radiated through the speaker like a tidal wave. The officer glanced at Patricia, who now looked decidedly uneasy. Zadeh's voice didn't waver. My father wants to speak with the supervisor on duty. There it was, the name, Marcus Washington, the man whose company was on the verge of transforming airport security across the country. The man every executive in the aviation industry either feared, envied, or desperately wanted on their side. The officer's posture shifted. Patricia's eyes darted to the supervisor's office. Zadeh extended her phone. My father would like a word. Reluctantly, the officer took it and stepped away. Meanwhile, Patricia's fingers tapped furiously. Oh, she said, after a moment, looks like it was a system error after all. You're all set. Zora stepped forward. What exactly was the issue? Patricia didn't meet her eyes. Just a glitch. It happens. To everyone, Zora asked. Or just to girls who look like us? Before Patricia could answer, the officer returned, his demeanor subdued. You're cleared to board, he said. We apologize for the confusion. The sisters didn't say another word. They didn't need to. Their silence was louder than outrage. As they walked down the jetway, Zadeh's phone buzzed with a message from their father. I'm on my way to the airport. We need to talk about what just happened. Love you both. They found their seats in the premium cabin, another quiet echo of their father's influence. But there was no comfort in it, just a thin veneer of privilege papering over what had already been revealed. Moments later, Jake Donnelly, the young pilot, passed by. He paused, concern etched into his features. "Everything okay?" "There was a problem at the gate," Zadeh replied, her tone carefully neutral. "But it's been resolved." Jake studied her face. "Those kinds of problems happen more often than they should," he said, "and rarely by accident." He moved on before they could respond, leaving Zora to glance sideways. "What do you think he meant by that?" Zadeh stared straight ahead. "I don't know," she whispered, "but I think Dad might." The seatbelt sign dinged. The plane rolled away from the gate, but what had taken flight wasn't just a jet bound for Chicago. It was something far bigger and far harder to land. The plane glided smoothly through the sky, but the atmosphere in the premium cabin remained tense. Zora stared blankly at the open book in her lap, the words unreadable through the storm behind her eyes. Zadeh sat beside her sketchbook, unopened earbuds in but no music playing. Neither spoke much during the flight. Every now and then, Zora would glance toward her sister, searching for a spark of the usual wit, the quiet commentary, the steady confidence. But it was like the incident at the gate had muted something in both of them. Not permanently, but deeply. They'd experienced moments of prejudice before, whispers, double takes, security guards trailing too closely in luxury stores, but this had been different. This was public. This was institutional. This was official. And it had only vanished when their father's name was spoken. That fact alone did something to both girls. It reminded them how little their own word, their own presence carried in a system that only respected the weight behind a name, not the truth behind their identities. As the plane began its descent into Chicago, Zadeh looked out the window. The skyline emerged from the clouds like a steel crown set against a lake of shimmering glass. "There it is," she said softly. Zora looked up. Home, Zadeh thought for a moment, then shook her head. "Not yet, but maybe part of it." The landing was smooth. As passengers unbuckled and stood to retrieve their luggage, Zadeh's phone buzzed again. Terminal 2. Near baggage claim. "I'm waiting, Dad." Despite the premium cabin seats, they carried only their hand luggage. They were efficient travelers, raised on delayed flights and last-minute meetings, hotel lobbies and weekend red-eyes. But today everything moved a little slower. When they stepped off the plane and entered the terminal, their father was there. Marcus Washington stood tall in jeans and a simple black sweater, no suit in sight, but unmistakably commanding. Even amid the airport crowd, he drew attention not just for his height or the way he moved, but for the way space subtly shifted around him. He spotted them, and his stern expression melted into something warmer. Dad, Zadeh called her voice both relief and reproof. She reached him first, throwing her arms around his waist, catching him off guard with the sheer force of the hug. "Easy," he chuckled, returning the embrace. Zora joined them more quietly, but no less sincerely. For a moment, they were just a family together, solid whole. But only for a moment. "Let's get out of here," Marcus said, still holding them both. "We'll talk in the car." "We only brought carry-ons," Zora noted, practical as ever. "Good," Marcus replied. "Gloria arranged for a car. It's waiting outside." As they walked through the terminal, Marcus studied them, shoulders squared, eyes steady. They carried themselves like young women who knew the value of their presence even when others didn't. But he also saw the tension, the unspoken fury in Zora's jaw, the thoughtful heaviness behind Zadeh's gaze. They were changed. At the curb, a sleek black SUV waited. Inside, tinted windows shielded them from curious eyes. Privacy glass separated them from the driver. The doors closed. The silence wrapped around them. "Start from the beginning," Marcus said, voice low and even. "Tell me exactly what happened." Zora and Zadeh did. They took turns, seamless and sharp, recounting every detail from the moment Patricia scanned the passes to the arrival of the security officer to the shift in tone once the name Marcus Washington entered the air. "It wasn't a misunderstanding," Zora said. "It was a message, and we got it loud and clear." Zadeh added, "They didn't see us as passengers until they knew whose children we were." And even then, Zora continued, "It wasn't respect, it was damage control." Marcus listened without interrupting, his fingers steepled beneath his chin, eyes locked on the middle distance. He looked not just like a father processing a personal insult, but like a man calculating the cost of a systemic flaw that had just touched his home. "Did you notice anyone else?" he finally asked. Anyone else pulled aside. Zade nodded. 2 other black passengers, one man in business clothes, one woman with a baby. They didn't protest, just stepped aside quietly. But we noticed. The white passengers breezed through even when the scanner beeped. Marcus exhaled slowly. "It's the exact problem I've been fighting in our own system." "The facial recognition bias?" Zora asked. He nodded. "Early testing flagged it. We caught higher false positive rates for people of color. I've refused to greenlight rollout until we fix it, despite pressure from the board." "And Meridian?" "They're rushing it," Zade asked. "They want exclusivity," Marcus said. "They think it'll give them a competitive edge." "But it'll only automate discrimination," Zora murmured. Marcus looked at her, pride flashing through his frustration. "Exactly." The car moved through downtown Chicago, gliding past glass towers and mirrored facades. But none of them looked out the window. Their focus was inward, on what had happened and what had to happen next. "You were right to call me," Marcus said finally. "But this isn't just about you anymore." "I know," Zade replied. "I felt it. Everyone saw. People heard me say your name." Marcus nodded grimly, and so did Meridian's executives. He tapped his phone. "They've been calling non-stop since you boarded. PR teams, legal teams, even Dalton himself." Zora's brows furrowed. "What are you going to do?" Marcus looked out at the road ahead. "What I should have done long ago," he said. The SUV glided through the streets of Chicago, the world outside a blur of light and motion. Inside, the Washington family sat in silence, the weight of what had happened beginning to settle into something sharper resolve. As they neared the downtown hotel, Zade's phone buzzed with a social media notification. Then another, and another. She glanced down, eyes widening. "Dad," she said cautiously, "I think people are talking about us." Marcus turned. "What do you mean?" She turned the screen so he could see. A tweet from an anonymous traveler had gone viral. It described what had happened at the gate, identified the twins by name, and noted the sudden change once they called their father. The final line hit like a gavel. "If this is how they treat the daughters of a CEO, imagine how they treat everyone else." The replies were pouring in. Hundreds, then thousands. Some were furious. Others shared similar stories. Hashtags were trending. Articles were being written in real time. Marcus's phone rang. "Gloria," he answered. "How bad is it?" "Very," she replied crisply. "It's everywhere. Major outlets are picking it up. Meridian's stock is down 3 points already, and Richard Dalton has called 8 times. Marcus stared out the window as the car pulled up to the hotel. "Let him wait. I'll call him when I'm ready." Inside the suite, everything was exactly as Gloria had arranged: impeccable decor, panoramic views, a fully stocked kitchen. Normally, the girls would have been awed, but now the plush surroundings felt almost absurd. Zade moved to the window, scrolling through the newsfeed. "They're calling for a boycott," she murmured. "Hundreds of people, thousands, all tagging Meridian." "It's not just us anymore," Zora said, setting down her bag. "It's bigger than one gate agent and a system error." Marcus nodded. "And that means we have a decision to make." He ordered their favorite comfort food, deep dish pizza fries, and chocolate cake, while the girls washed up and changed. The scent of familiarity offered brief solace in the middle of the storm. Then around the dining table they faced the question that mattered most. "What do you want to do?" Marcus asked them. "This attention wasn't something you chose. You don't have to speak if you're not ready." Zade looked at Zora. Zora nodded. "We want to speak," Zade said firmly. "What happened to us happens to people every day. The only difference is they don't have someone powerful to call. No one listens to them." "We can't stay quiet," Zora added. "This isn't just about us. It's about the system." Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying them with a mix of pride and concern. "If you do this, Meridian will fight back. Their PR team will spin it. They'll try to protect their reputation. Then we stay ahead of them," Zora said, her voice clear and resolute. "Jake might help," Zade added. "He saw what happened, and he said it wasn't a one-off. He's been collecting data." Marcus reached for his wallet and pulled out Jake Donnelly's card. "I'll contact him tonight." He typed out a message while the girls began drafting their own statement. At that same moment, his phone buzzed again, this time with an email. From Jake. Subject line: documentation attached, internal bias patterns confirmed. Inside the email were charts, timelines, redacted memos. The data was damning. Meridian's own system was flagging black passengers for additional screening at rates more than triple those of white passengers. And there were records, internal flags, and staff warnings showing that the issue had been raised multiple times. It had been ignored. Marcus stood. This is worse than I thought. He paced the room, scanning the files. They knew. And they kept going. What's our move? Zadeh asked. We tell the truth, Marcus replied. But we do it strategically, controlled, clear, loud. He turned to Zora. Pull the data points that matter most, the ones that show pattern, not just incident. To Zadeh, write it like a story. What happened to you, how it felt, and what needs to change. He tapped a few buttons and called Gloria. Get my comms team on standby, we're making a statement. And tell legal I want a compliance review ready to go within 24 hours. There was a long pause on the other end. Then understood. And Marcus? Yes, I'm proud of you. He looked back at his daughters, one organizing data like a lawyer, the other scripting a movement with the precision of a poet. I didn't do this, he said softly. They did. Outside Chicago glowed with lights, unaware that in one hotel suite a new standard was being forged. Not just a press release, a reckoning. Later that night, the knock on the suite door came soft but steady. Jake Donnelly stood in the hallway, still in uniform, though the top button of his shirt was undone and his flight badge had been removed. His expression was calm, but something in his eyes gave away the tension he carried not for himself, but for what he was about to hand over. Marcus welcomed him in with a firm handshake. Thank you for coming. I appreciate you letting me, Jake replied. Zadeh and Zora greeted him with nods of recognition, their expressions a mixture of trust and curiosity. I brought everything, Jake said, setting down a slim black portfolio and opening his laptop. Logs, screenshots, email threads, even flight data. He paused. Some of it could cost me my job. Marcus looked up. Why take the risk? Jake hesitated, then met Marcus's gaze directly. Because my father flew commercial for 30 years, he taught me that keeping silent when you know something's wrong isn't professionalism. It's cowardice. And I won't be part of a system that punishes people for how they look before they even speak. Marcus nodded slowly. He raised you right. Jake brought up a timeline he had compiled. The algorithm was launched last March. Within weeks, employees were reporting irregularities, mostly around how often passengers of color were flagged for additional screening. He pulled up an internal memo. Here, August of last year. Meridian's own data analysts warned of statistical disparities. They recommended software modifications. What happened to the recommendation? Zora asked. Jake clicked another document. Rejected. Budget impact. Implementation delays. They buried it. Zadeh leaned forward, voice low but sharp, so they knew the system was biased. And they just kept using it. Jake nodded, over and over. Because it saved time, because no one powerful enough had been flagged. Until now. Silence fell over the room. Then Marcus said quietly, That changes everything. Zora sat back, eyes narrowing. This isn't just discrimination, this is negligence. Deliberate negligence. Zadeh added, and it means they can't pretend it was just one agent going rogue. It's baked into their technology. Jake glanced at Marcus. I thought you should know. There are people inside Meridian who are trying to fight this from within. Quietly. But they exist. After today, some of them are ready to come forward. Anonymous, Marcus asked. For now, Jake said, but if this blows open wide enough, some might speak on the record. Marcus stood, walking to the window, hands in his pockets. They'll spin it, he said. Try to scapegoat one or two people, maybe even fire Patricia and call it a day. They're already trying, Gloria confirmed via speakerphone. Dalton is scrambling, media consultants, crisis teams, stocks down 10 points in 6 hours. We've had 5 major tech partners reach out for clarification. Clarification? Zora scoffed. They want to know whether we're about to bring the whole system down. They should be asking whether they want to be. Next, Zadeh said. Marcus turned back to the room. We're not just going to react, we're going to lead. He pulled up a draft statement on his tablet. Initiative Proposal, the Washington Standard, a new ethical benchmark for AI-powered security systems, prioritizing fairness, transparency, and accountability. This is what we'll launch tomorrow, Marcus said, not just a rebuttal, a movement. Terra Global will create the first set of enforceable ethical AI standards in the transportation industry. Jake stared at the screen. You're building a better system. Marcus nodded, and you just helped make it possible. Zora tapped on her laptop. We can roll this out with visuals, use some of Jake's charts, highlight the difference between the design goals and the lived realities. Zadeh added, and pair it with the story. Ours, Jake's, the passengers they silenced. Marcus looked at both daughters, struck again by their clarity. This will draw fire, from Meridian, from their board, maybe even from Terra Global's own. Let them come, Zora said. We're ready, Zadeh finished. Outside the city hummed on into the night, unaware that on the 30th floor of a quiet hotel, a blueprint was being written, not just for a press release, not just for reform, but for a reckoning that would echo far beyond two girls at a gate. And in that room, for the first time in a long time, Marcus Washington didn't feel like he was leading alone. He was building something with them, together. The next morning, Chicago woke to headlines. Twins of Tech CEO denied boarding bias in the skies. Marcus Washington fires, back with new AI standards plan. Meridian Airlines faces mounting backlash over racial profiling incident. Every major news outlet was covering it. From the morning talk shows to financial networks, the Washington family was now the epicenter of a national conversation, and not just about race or travel, but about trust. About systems. About the unseen algorithms shaping modern life. In the hotel suite, Marcus sat at the dining table, flanked by his daughters and Jake. Laptops open, press team dialed in, legal advisors in the loop. It wasn't just another CEO damage control moment. This was different. He opened the final draft of the joint statement they had prepared overnight. The top read simply, "If the system can't see you fairly, then it's time to build a better one." Zora and Zadeh's narrative followed clear, factual, and devastating in its simplicity. No dramatization, no embellishment. Just the truth. They were stopped, questioned, and humiliated. Not because they broke a rule, but because the system didn't recognize their legitimacy until it recognized their father's name. Attached were graphs and data Jake had compiled showing disparities across Meridian's screening process. The most damning chart, black female passengers, were flagged for additional checks 4 times more than any other group. Included too were screenshots of internal emails where concerns had been raised and dismissed. This goes live in 1 hour, Marcus told the team on speaker. Are we aligned? Gloria's voice crackled through. We're aligned, but be aware Dalton's office is preparing their own press conference. They're welcome to respond, Marcus said. We're not playing defense, we're setting the standard. A knock came at the door. Gloria again, this time in person. She entered briskly carrying a folder. There's more. She placed the folder in front of Marcus, inside an anonymous letter from a Meridian executive. Typed, signed only with initials. It detailed how several Black and Latino staff members at Meridian had threatened to resign unless leadership took immediate action. It wasn't just external pressure that had forced Richard Dalton to step down, it was an internal revolt. Marcus handed the letter to Zora and Zadeh. Read this. As they scanned the lines, a quiet realization settled between them. Real change wasn't just sparked by outrage. It was built by people inside and out who refused to stay silent. This changes how we respond, Marcus said. We need to acknowledge the people inside who are trying to make things better. Zora nodded. If we don't, it looks like we're attacking the whole company. But we're not. We're challenging the culture, Zadeh added. The system. Not every individual caught in it. Jake sat quietly, then spoke. Some of the folks I've worked with for years are terrified of speaking up. But what your family is doing, it's giving them a reason to. Marcus looked at his daughters. Ready, they nodded. At 10:30 a.m. sharp, the joint statement was published on every Terra Global channel sent to newsrooms, influencers, industry, regulators, civil rights organizations, and even shareholders. Within 15 minutes, it was trending globally. At £10.27, Meridian released a carefully worded apology, announced the formation of an internal review board, and unveiled a new partnership proposal, a joint initiative with Terra Global to establish industry-wide ethical AI standards in airport security screening. Marcus turned to Gloria. "What do you think?" She didn't answer right away. "Then it's exactly what they should do, but now we hold them to it." His phone buzzed. Martin Chen, the board vote. Marcus stepped into the adjacent room to take the call. Marcus Martin began tone reserved. "Before we proceed, I want to understand your endgame. What does success look like for you in all this?" Marcus didn't hesitate. "Success is not destroying Meridian. It's making sure what happened to my daughters doesn't happen to anyone else again. It's building technology that sees people as people. And if Meridian wants to be part of that, they'll have to meet us there on our terms." There was a pause. Then Martin said, "I'll see you at the board meeting." Marcus re-entered the room where Zora and Zadeh sat reviewing responses, some emotional, others skeptical, many deeply moved. One reply stood out, a woman who wrote, "My 10-year-old daughter saw your story on the news. She asked why those girls weren't allowed to board. I told her they were. She said, not until someone with power said so. She gets it. I wish more adults did." Marcus smiled faintly. "Looks like people are listening." Zadie looked up from her screen. "Now we need to decide what we want them to hear next." Marcus nodded. "Then we say it clearly. This isn't a campaign, it's a call." He looked at both daughters. "Let's build something that outlives the outrage." The boardroom at Terra Global's headquarters buzzed with a quiet tension. Every leather chair was filled, every tablet lit, every eye sharp. Marcus Washington entered flanked by his daughters, their presence unexpected, but not uninvited. William Barrett, the senior board member and one of the loudest voices advocating for the Meridian deal, rose with a thin smile. "Ah, the young ladies at the center of our public dilemma," he said. "I must say it's rare we open board meetings to teenagers." Marcus didn't flinch. "My daughters were the ones directly affected by the very systems we build. Their voices belong here." Martin Chen, the board's chair, gestured toward two open seats near Marcus. "Let's hear what they have to say." Zora sat with calm precision, hands folded on the polished table. Zadeh beside her, composed but unafraid. "Thank you," Zora began, her voice firm and clear. "What happened to us was not a misunderstanding. It was the logical result of a flawed system, one that flags people not because of what they've done, but because of what they look like." Zadeh continued, "We weren't selected for additional screening because we made a mistake. We were selected because the system decided we were more likely to make one. And that judgment wasn't based on behavior. It was based on bias." She paused, letting the silence hold. "We weren't seen as travelers," she added, "until we were seen as someone's daughters." The room remained quiet, but the air shifted. A subtle acknowledgement in the eyes of those who had come ready to challenge, but now sat reflecting. William cleared his throat. "Miss Washington's, with all due respect, our company is at a critical juncture. This incident, however unfortunate, has jeopardized a $20 million partnership." "No," Marcus interjected. "This incident has revealed why we must lead, not follow. We don't build tech just to sell it. We build it to change something." Diane Foster, the only other person of color on the board, leaned in. "And if we sell that tech before it's ready, before it's fair, we sell out everything we claim to stand for." William pushed back. "But our fiduciary duty is to shareholders, not social justice movements." "Then maybe it's time we broaden what fiduciary means," Marcus replied, "because long-term value isn't built on silence, it's built on integrity." Martin looked at him thoughtfully. "And Meridian's new proposal, the Joint Ethics Initiative. Their CEO has resigned. They've asked you to lead the overhaul. Does that change anything?" Marcus didn't hesitate. "It's a step. But it's not a guarantee. Words are easy, change is hard." Martin nodded. "So what do you recommend?" Marcus rose slowly. "I recommend we take this opportunity to set the standard, not just for airports, but for every industry relying on AI and automation. We adopt the Washington Standard. We make fairness measurable, transparent, and non-negotiable. And we use this moment not to protect a partnership, but to protect our purpose." The board fell silent. Then Martin called the vote. The motion on the table, a no-confidence resolution against Marcus for compromising business interests due to personal bias. William raised his hand. 3 others followed, then Diane, then 2 more, tied 4-4. All eyes turned to Martin Chen. He paused, looked at Marcus, then at the twins. When I joined this board, he said I believed in technology with conscience. Today, I've seen that conscience live in this room. My vote is against the motion. Relief rippled unspoken. Martin continued, I also propose we officially endorse the creation and leadership of the Washington Standard positioning Terra Global as an ethical trailblazer in AI development. Diane seconded the motion. Even one of William's original supporters changed sides. It passed. As the meeting adjourned, Martin approached the twins. If you two ever consider a future in tech or leadership, Terra Global would be lucky to have you. Outside the boardroom, Gloria waited, her face lighting up as they exited. Well, she asked. Marcus nodded. We held the line. She handed him her tablet. You'll want to see this. The screen displayed Meridian's latest press release. Meridian Airlines partners with Terra Global on industry-first ethical AI reform. $20 million committed to training diverse tech leaders. Zade read aloud, her voice tinged with disbelief. They're owning it or trying to control the narrative, Zora replied. Marcus smiled slightly. Either way, they've handed us the mic. Gloria added, they want you to lead the ethics board. Zade grinned. Looks like gate C23 just became ground zero for something bigger. Not just a gate, Marcus said. A turning point. As they walked through the halls of the building he had built, now changed forever by 2 young voices that refused to be dismissed. Marcus felt something rare. Hope, and not just for his company, but for the future his daughters had already begun shaping. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the towers of Chicago, the Washington family gathered once more around the suite's dining table. But this time, there were no open laptops. No press calls, no strategy sessions, just deep dish pizza chocolate cake and the rare stillness of a moment earned. The whirlwind of the past 48 hours had shifted something in all of them, not just the public narrative, but their private dynamics. Zade laughed more easily. Zora allowed herself to lean back, sip soda, and let her mind rest. Marcus, for once, wasn't checking emails or glancing at news alerts. He was present. After the plates were cleared, he stood. There's something I've been waiting to show you, he said, walking toward the suite's hallway. Come with me. The twins followed him down the elevator and into a waiting car. As they drove north, the streets grew quieter, more residential. Trees lined the sidewalks. Brownstones loomed stately, their ironwork and stone facades bathed in warm light. The car slowed before a freshly restored brick home on a tree-lined corner in Lincoln Park. Marcus turned to them. I bought it 6 months ago, been renovating it in secret. Zora blinked. For what? For you, his voice softened. 3 bedrooms, a studio for your art Zade, an office for your code Zora, a home base whenever you need one. They stared at him stunned. It's not to replace Boston, he added quickly. Your mum and I agreed this is an addition, not a subtraction. A place where you're always welcome, where you don't have to be anyone's employees, prodigies, or proofs of concept. Zade was the first to move. She stepped out of the car, walked up the front steps, and pressed her hand to the newly painted door. I don't know what to say, she whispered. You don't have to, Marcus said. Zora joined her, gazing up at the second-story windows. You really planned this before any of this happened? Marcus nodded. Before the gate, before the flight, before the storm. But you knew something was coming, Zora said quietly. Not like this, he admitted. But I've always known the world would challenge you differently. I wanted to build a space where you could face it without proving yourselves every second. Inside the house was a blend of modern design and personal touches. Framed family photos lined the hallway. There was a sunlit art room already stocked with supplies. A work nook with dual monitors and shelves labeled Zora's Zone. Even a breakfast bar that mirrored the one from their childhood home. The girls moved through the room, slowly absorbing the intention in every corner. You did all this for us, Zade finally asked. I did this because of you, Marcus said. Because you reminded me what all of this is for. Not just companies or contracts or quarterly reports, but legacy. In the living room, they found a long sketch framed above the fireplace. It was one of Zade's. Unfinished. I scanned it from your old notebook, Marcus said. I liked that it wasn't complete. It felt honest. Zadie stared at it for a long time, then turned to her father. "Do I get to finish it here?" He nodded. "Any time you want." A gentle quiet fell between them, a pause that wasn't empty but full. Zora, ever the practical one, broke it. "So, who's paying the Wi-Fi bill?" They laughed too hard, too long, and it was the best kind of sound, a reminder that even in the wake of something heavy, joy could find its way back. Later that night, back at the suite, they prepared for one final task, publishing their personal message. A joint video statement. Raw, direct, no music, no edits. Zora opened with, "We are Zora and Zadie Washington. And we are not exceptions. We are examples." Zadie continued, "What happened to us at Gate C23 is not rare. But what happened after doesn't usually happen because most people don't have a platform, or a parent with power, or a voice that's heard." Zora added, "We're using ours, not just to tell our story, but to make sure no one else's is ignored. And together, this isn't about revenge, it's about repair, and the future we all deserve to board." They posted it across every platform. The world responded within minutes. Comments flooded in from high schoolers who had been profiled to retired flight attendants, who apologized for never speaking up to AI engineers vowing to re-examine their own code. It was no longer a story, it was a signal, and from a pair of teenage girls who had once stood quietly at a boarding gate, it echoed louder than anyone could have predicted. The ripple effect was faster than anyone expected. By the end of the first week, the video had amassed over 28 million views across platforms. National news anchors quoted the line, "We are not exceptions. We are examples." It became a rallying cry not just for those who had experienced discrimination in air travel, but for anyone who had been told silently or bluntly that they didn't belong. Universities requested to license the video for ethics seminars. Civil rights organizations reached out to partner. Coding boot camps and tech firms offered scholarships in the twins' names. Even celebrities shared it, some offering public support, others quietly DMing their gratitude. And then came the letter, delivered to Terra Global headquarters by private courier, sealed in cream linen paper. The return address, United States Department of Transportation. Inside a personal note addressed to Marcus, "Mr. Washington, we have been monitoring your leadership following the recent incident at O'Hare. Your daughter's courage and your company's swift ethical response have not gone unnoticed. We'd like to formally invite you and your family to testify before the Senate Subcommittee on Transportation Technology and Equity." Secretary L. Donahue Marcus reread the letter twice before setting it down. Across the room, Zora and Zadie sat on the couch, flipping through mock-ups of a new initiative they'd begun developing, a youth-centered AI ethics campaign called Visible. "You girls up for Washington, D.C.? He asked, lifting the letter. Zora raised a brow, as in Congress, as in testifying before it. Zadie stared at the envelope. "Will they actually listen?" maybe Marcus said. "Or maybe they'll just want to appear like they're listening," Zora replied. "Then we make it impossible not to hear us." The day of the testimony arrived with little ceremony, but massive impact. The hearing room was packed, cameras, reporters, officials. Marcus wore his signature dark suit, but the girls chose simple elegance. Zora in a navy blazer, Zadie in a long grey dress with black flats. They didn't dress to impress. They dressed to speak. Senator Reeves opened the floor. "Mr. Washington, you have the floor." Marcus began methodically laying out data timelines, missed warnings. Then he stepped aside. "I'd like you to hear directly from the ones this system failed." Zadie stepped up first. Her voice was calm, her gaze steady. "When that gate agent stopped us, she didn't just question our tickets. She questioned our presence, our right to belong." She recounted the story not with drama, but with detail. Zora followed her words, sharp and clear. "Bias doesn't need hatred to exist. It just needs silence. Systems don't have to shout to harm you. They can whisper and still exclude you entirely." One senator leaned forward. "What do you recommend, Miss Washington?" Zadie glanced at Zora, then answered, "Audits, transparency, representation on development teams, mandatory bias testing before deployment, and consequences when those standards aren't met." Zora added, "And education, not just technical training, but ethical training. If someone can code a future they don't understand, they shouldn't be building it." By the time they finished, the room was silent. Senator Reeves finally spoke. I've been on this committee 12 years. That was the most important testimony I've heard. Afterward, journalists swarmed, headlines shifted, networks replayed clips on loop. But what truly mattered came days later. A new bill was introduced, the Fair Algorithms Act, requiring third-party bias audits of all government-funded AI systems and incentivizing companies to meet ethical benchmarks. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. And attached to the bill in footnote and inspiration alike were two names, Zora and Zadeh Washington. Back in Chicago, the twins sat under soft evening light on the porch of their new home, sketchbooks in hand, music low. The chaos had quieted for now. "You think things will really change?" Zadeh asked. Zora thought for a long time. "Not overnight, but we pushed the wheel. It's rolling now." Zadeh smiled. "Maybe next time a kid like us gets stopped at a gate, they won't be alone." Zora looked out at the skyline. "No," she said, "they'll have a system that sees them, because we built one." And in the quiet between the world as it was and the world they were helping shape, the sisters sat together unshaken and finally seen. Weeks passed, headlines faded, the frenzy slowed, but impact, real measurable impact, had just begun to surface. Across the country, airports began implementing voluntary pre-screening reviews on AI systems. Several major airlines initiated internal equity audits. One even suspended use of facial recognition entirely until third-party bias validation was completed. Terra Global launched a new division, Ethos Labs, a department solely dedicated to ethical oversight in AI development. Zora and Zadeh were listed as founding advisors with honorary fellow titles. It wasn't ceremonial. They attended meetings, offered feedback, asked hard questions the engineers hadn't thought to ask. At one of those meetings, a lead developer hesitated before presenting a new passenger flagging protocol. "I'm worried it'll be too slow if we add all the checks you're suggesting," he told Zora. She didn't flinch. Speed is only impressive when it doesn't sacrifice accuracy or dignity. Zadeh added gently, "And if your system embarrasses one family every 1,000 flights, is that efficiency or just indifference by design?" The team made changes. Later that day, as they walked through Terra's glass-walled offices, they passed a framed print of the company's new mission. "If the system can't see you, build one that does," underneath the Washington standard. Meanwhile, back in Boston, Caroline watched all of this unfold from her apartment's living room. She wasn't in front of cameras, but she wasn't distant either. She had guided the girls from a young age to speak truth with clarity and purpose. Now she watched them do it not as children, but as changemakers. She sent them a text, "Your voices are thunder, but your grace is what makes people listen." They didn't respond right away. But hours later she received a short reply. "Thanks, Mum. We know who taught us to speak." One afternoon in late fall, a letter arrived addressed to Zora and Zadeh. The return address was unfamiliar, Meridian Airlines Ethics Division. Inside, a note from their new Director of Cultural Compliance, recently hired after the scandal: "Dear Zora and Zadeh, we owe you not just an apology, but a thank you. Because of your story, we've begun mandatory empathy training across all airports. Because of your voices, our hiring panels are now 60% more diverse. And because of your courage, 5 former passengers who filed complaints and were ignored have now received direct apologies and settlements." The last line hit hardest. "You weren't the ones who needed fixing. Our system was." Zadeh read it out loud. Zora listened, then folded it carefully and tucked it into a drawer in their shared home office next to the original boarding passes from Flight 1982. A quiet reminder of where it all began. That weekend they returned to O'Hare Airport, not for press, not for protest, just for perspective. Gate C-23 looked the same. The check-in desk, the scuffed tile, the gate agent, someone new, smiling warmly as they walked past. They weren't pulled aside, they weren't stopped. They scanned their tickets and walked through, and for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like getting past a checkpoint. It felt like passing a baton, the start of something that would continue long after them, because real change doesn't end with a headline, or a hashtag, or even a law. Real change starts when those with voices raise them and keep raising them until silence isn't an option, until systems don't need names to recognize humanity, until every gate leads to possibility, not prejudice. And in that moment, boarding a simple flight like anyone else, Zora and Zadeh understood. They had done more than make noise. They had made room. The seasons turned. Winter arrived in Chicago with its usual elegance, snow blanketing rooftops, Lake Michigan shimmering like steel beneath gray skies. But inside, the Washington home warmth was everywhere, in laughter echoing through hallways, in late-night talks, in the quiet rhythm of new routines. Zora had taken a gap semester from her early admission program at Stanford, not to pause learning, but to redirect it. She began auditing courses on algorithmic justice, working closely with professors who'd read about her in the news, but quickly realized she was more than a headline, she was a peer. Meanwhile, Zadeh launched her first solo art exhibit, Unflagged. It featured a series of portraits faces from airports, buses, courtrooms, schools. People who had been profiled, overlooked, misread by systems that claimed to be neutral. Each canvas was overlaid with layers of translucent code binary sequences, algorithms, facial mapping grids representing how technology had tried to reduce these humans into data points. But the emotion in the eyes, the posture, the imperfections, they defied compression. The show opened to quiet acclaim, but the message was loud. At the exhibit's entrance hung a quote, "I am not an error rate. Anonymous passenger gate C23. The piece drew educators, activists, artists, and technologists. A few silently wept. Some asked how they could help. Others simply stood still, as if seeing their own reflection refracted through someone else's truth. Zora stood beside her sister that night, watching strangers connect to something they'd lived. "You did this," she whispered. "No," Zadeh said. "We did this. I just painted what we all carried." Later that week, Marcus hosted a quiet dinner in their honor. No press, no donors, just family and a few trusted allies, Gloria Diane Foster, Jake Donnelly. Jake, now a full pilot, shared news of his own. "I've been accepted into a new task force," he said between bites of Caroline's sweet potato pie. "The FAA is assembling a committee to review aviation screening protocols nationwide. They want fresh eyes, voices that aren't afraid to challenge the norm." "Let me guess." Zora grinned. "They saw your name and thought, that's the guy who stood with the Washington twins." Jake chuckled. "Pretty much. Your names open a lot of doors now. Then we better make sure they open them for others too," Zadeh said. The room hummed with a rare kind of satisfaction, not just success but shared purpose. These weren't people chasing credit, they were people building momentum. Near the end of the evening, Gloria handed Marcus a slim envelope. He opened it and smiled. From the mayor's office, he said, "They want to name a new tech-focused youth center after you two." Zora's eyes widened. Seriously, Zadeh blinked. Why? Marcus shrugged. Because change doesn't just belong in boardrooms. It belongs in neighborhoods, in communities that tech usually forgets. The girls exchanged a glance, then nodded in unison. "If we do this," Zora said, "it has to be real. Classes, mentors, internships, not a building with a plaque." Marcus grinned. "Then it'll be exactly that. Because that's how you operate." Outside, snow began to fall soft and deliberate. Inside, ideas bloomed. Mentorship programs, AI literacy workshops, internships for students of color, a curriculum that included not just coding, but consequence. Not just automation, but accountability. A few weeks later, the name was unveiled, the Zora and Zadeh Center for Ethical Innovation tagline, where code meets conscience. At the ribbon cutting, dozens of young people filed in. Some had never touched a computer outside of school. Others came from robotics clubs and AP classes. But all of them left that day feeling something they hadn't felt before seen. And as Zora and Zadeh stood beside the sign bearing their names, cameras flashing, they didn't pose like public figures. They stood like mirrors, reflecting back what every child walking through those doors might one day become. Not just users of systems, shapers of them. Spring arrived not with fanfare, but with quiet transformation, just like the kind the Washington family had ignited. The headlines had long moved on. The noise faded. But beneath the surface, the roots of change were taking hold. One morning, while walking through the halls of the Zora and Zadeh Center, the twins noticed something new, a corkboard filled with handwritten notes from students. I used to think tech wasn't for me. Now I'm learning to build it. This place taught me I'm not invisible. They stopped me at the gate. Now I'm learning how the gate was built and how to build better ones. Zadeh stood in front of the board for a long time, fingers brushing over the edges of the notes like fragile petals. Zora joined her silent at first, then said softly, "They're not just learning code here, they're learning who they are." That day they hosted a workshop called Bias Isn't Just in the Machine. The guest speaker was a former TSA officer who had resigned after witnessing racial profiling too many times to count. "They trained us to trust the system more than our instincts," he told the room. "But what happens when your instincts know the system is wrong?" A student raised her hand. "How do you stand up when the system is bigger than you?" Zora responded gently. "You remember that every system is just people, policies, written software, built choices made, and people can be challenged. People can evolve." Zadeh added, "You don't always have to be loud to be powerful. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do is stay and change the room by refusing to disappear." After the workshop, a small group stayed behind to speak with the twins. One was a quiet boy named Elias, no older than 15, with a nervous glance and a notebook full of ideas. "I've been working on something," he said. "It's kind of rough." He handed them a tablet displaying a prototype app that analyzed digital hiring platforms for racially coded language. "It's designed to flag job postings that filter people out without saying it outright," Elias explained, "like requiring clean speech or culture fit, when that really just means don't be different." Zora blinked, impressed. "You built this, most of it," he said. "There's still bugs." "It's brilliant," Zadeh said. "Can we help?" That moment became a turning point for Elias and for the center itself. The twins pitched his prototype to Terra Global's innovation arm. Within a month, it was accepted into their incubator program under the mentorship of a senior engineer. Zora smiled as she told Marcus the news. "You said we should build systems that see people," she said. "Now we're helping others build them too." Marcus leaned back in his chair, a rare look of contentment crossing his face. "That's what legacy is. Not what you do, but what you empower others to do when you're not in the room." That evening, as the city glowed with a golden dusk, the twins sat once more on their porch. The scent of budding trees drifted through the air. Their phones were off. No alerts, no meetings, just the hush of a world slowly rebalancing. "You ever wonder," Zora said, "what would have happened if we hadn't spoken up, if we had just let them stop us and sat quietly?" Zadeh nodded. "Sometimes. But then I remember she said we weren't just standing up for ourselves. We were standing up for all the people who didn't get to speak, or who spoke and were ignored." Zora looked toward the horizon. "And now," she said, "we listen, and we lift, not because they sought glory, not because they wanted credit, but because they knew what it felt like to be unseen. And they had promised, silently, fiercely, that no one else would stand at a gate alone and dismissed if they could help it. Not on their watch. Not anymore. Summer arrived with a softness that felt earned. The city pulsed with festivals, rooftop laughter, and music drifting through open windows. But for the Washingtons, this season was something else entirely, a quiet exhale after a year that had altered not only their lives, but the lives of countless others. It had been nearly 12 months since Gate C23, since the denial, since the name drop, since the reckoning, and now the ripple had become a wave. The Zora and Zadeh Center had expanded into 2 new cities. Over 400 students had participated in mentorship programs. More than 70% of them were girls black and brown, many of whom had never dreamed of tech careers until they saw 2 young women who looked like them leading the charge. Airports across the country began integrating third-party AI audits as a standard practice. Several airlines rewrote their bias training protocols with direct input from Terra Global's Ethos Labs. And the Washington Standard, it had been adopted by 3 Fortune 100 companies, 6 regional airports, and 1 international NGO focused on digital ethics in global aid systems. One evening, Marcus sat in his office, staring at a letter of intent from the United Nations, inviting him and the twins to keynote a summit on technology and human dignity. He didn't text them about it right away. He just smiled. Because the truth was, he wasn't leading anymore. He was witnessing. Down the street in their own home, Zora and Zadeh sat in the backyard under a canopy of string lights, their hands sticky from popsicles, laptops, closed sketchpads resting at their sides. "Do you remember?" Zora asked, "when we thought we were just going to visit Dad and tour the office?" Zadeh laughed. "We just wanted to fly. We didn't know we were going to launch." They fell into silence, comfortable and close. Fireflies blinked around them. Somewhere in the distance, a child laughed. A city lived. Then Zadeh whispered, "Do you think it's over?" Zora shook her head. "No, but I think we're ready for what comes next." In the days that followed, the girls received invitations, accolades, even talk show bookings. But they chose carefully now, selectively, because their time was no longer just a response to crisis. It was investment in legacy. They didn't just speak at conferences, they redesigned them. They didn't just join panels, they led labs. They didn't just ride momentum, they redirected it. On the anniversary of that fateful day, they returned once more to O'Hare, this time not as passengers, but as honored guests at the unveiling of a new exhibit titled Voices from Gate C23 When Systems Listen Photos. Testimonies, interactive AI demonstrations that showed the difference between biased and corrected systems. And at the center, 2 boarding passes under glass. Zora's, Zadeh's. The tagline read, "They were stopped. They spoke. And because they did, others now move forward uninterrupted." Zadeh stood before the case, eyes glinting with memory. "Funny," she murmured. "All this started because someone couldn't see us." Zora stepped beside her, "And now the world can't ignore us." As visitors moved through the exhibit, 2 little girls about 10 years old stopped in front of the case. One pointed at the names on the passes. "Zora and Zadeh," she whispered. "That's them." They changed everything the other said. From across the room, the real Zora and Zadeh heard. And smiled, because that's what legacy really is. Not a spotlight, not a statue, not even a center named in your honor. Legacy is the way a young girl says your name with wonder. Legacy is the fact that when someone like her stands at a gate, now she stands taller, she stands seen. And no matter who questions her place in the world, she won't question it herself. Not anymore.